Hi, it's Phil McCauley from Labour Business TV, and today I'm joined by one of our other members, Liz Hind. Liz, welcome. You run a pub, you're a pub landlady. Coronavirus has affected your business. Tell us where we are right now and what's going to happen next.
Well, as all of the pubs in the UK have had to do, we closed down mid-March, and since then we've been struggling to get clear guidance from the government about what support measures are in place and what we're supposed to do for our staff and when we may be able to open up. So we've spent the last few weeks desperately trying to find some answers and pushing for those answers. And we're now where Boris Johnson has laid out some sort of plan for us reopening, and we may be able to open up at the beginning of July, but we don't know yet. That's dependent on other measures and how effective they are.
So before we move on to what might happen next, what has been your experience and the experience for your own staff? How have you coped?
I'm not entirely sure we have coped. We've been claiming furlough money, so I had a grant of £10,000 because my rateable value is about 14,000. So I got the £10,000 grant, although I'm lucky to have had that because, of course, 20% of pubs in this country have a rateable value of over 51,000, so I've had no grant support at all. We closely monitored the plans for furlough and exactly how much that I could pay my staff and claim back through furlough. So I had to run several weeks worth of pay while we were still waiting for some of those answers. Eventually that came. We've been using that grant money to top up the pay of our workforce, but obviously that £10,000 only goes so far, and that's about to run out now.
So when the Prime Minister does come out with his announcements later today and following on from that in the week ahead, what kind of guidelines do you think we're going to need in the pub industry? I mean, how are you going to protect your workers and your customers from this virus?
I'm very disappointed that at no point has the government seriously engaged with people like me to ask us what controls are possible. So instead we get government advisors who are economists putting out recommendations. So for example, there was a plan floated that we should limit how many pints we could sell to each customer. The suggestion was that a customer could come in and have 2 pints and then go home. Now, anyone that runs a bar knows that that's an encouragement for people to go on a pub crawl. So why they're not properly engaging with us and saying, well, is it possible to run a bar and keep your staff socially distanced? I don't know, but we've not been asked those questions. And I know from my own experience that I could only fit one member of staff behind the bar and make sure that they're socially distant. So the question then is, well, can I run a viable business with only one member of staff behind the bar and between a 30 and 50% capacity of tables in my pub? Well, the answer is no, I can't do that and make a profit at the same time. So there's massive questions open there about, can we reopen hospitality safely? And if we can't, what happens to the millions of staff that are reliant on hospitality? There's no magic job tree for them to go and shake and get a different job. So we need to start looking now at retraining them, redeploying them, and making sure that they are safe and that they're not going to start, running debts against their rent and not being able to pay their bills.
It's an extraordinary situation, and you brought up a great point, which is the viability of the business. So even if Johnson's announcements mean that people do return to work and the hospitality opens up again after a fashion with some social distancing measures in place, whatever they are and however they are to be policed, how on earth is it going to be supported by the government? I mean, is there a case for more financial support during the social distancing period, because you're not going to be viable?
No, we're not going to be viable. And a lot of pub owners like me are actually tenants. So we rent off big pub companies. And at the moment, the negotiations over what rent we need to pay is being left entirely down to individual pub owners like me. There's been no guidelines from the government about that, no pressure put on those pub companies to allow us to have a rent review, because that's going to need to happen quite quickly. That if we are running on 30% capacity, then obviously I can't pay the same amount of rent to the pub company as I was previously. So yeah, it's measures like that, that if the government properly consulted us and looked at what the problems are throughout the whole industry, not just talk to the big brewers and the big pub companies, but small business owners like me, that these problems would appear and we can start saving some viable businesses.
It makes a lot of sense. And finally, what would your message directly be for the Prime Minister and his advisors seeing this film today? What does he need to do next?
He needs to get on top of testing, tracking and tracing. He needs to make sure that public transport is safe. Understandably, a lot of staff have concerns about their health and safety coming into work. If I can't put those controls into place because I am not in charge of public transport, I am not in charge of tracking and tracing, then the government needs to step up and actually do it properly and not put that blame onto me and say, oh, well, we've had problems because businesses have been opening up when it's not safe to do so. That's not my responsibility. I am absolutely furious that businesses have not been given the guidelines that we need to make sure that we are behaving responsibly. You know, what does a safe working environment look like? And unless that's written down in the government with some example risk assessments and some proper measures that we can put into place, it's not my responsibility to make those decisions about my workplace and to make sure it's safe. I can't do that. I can't make sure the buses are safe. The government needs to step up and make sure that we are controlling the virus by testing, tracking and tracing, like all of the scientists have told him to do. It's not my job, it's not small businesses' job, it's not large businesses' job. We understand why the unions are upset and why they are asking questions of the government, but it's the government that needs to take control of this situation and not pass the buck on to people like me.
Ms. Hind, thank you very much indeed.